Many eras ago, before the dredging of the new harbor and the rise of Port Deepwater to a global powerhouse of mercantile enterprise, there was a different city here, much less dominant. It's still home to many people and the ancestors of today's powerful merchant families. That city, however, found its doom, and the only remnants of it nowadays are some scattered tunnels and ruins here and there, buried layers upon layers now under the current Port Deepwater. And while it never was a bustling global player, it was still a center of civilization, enough of a center, in fact, to attract the meddlings of a nefarious cult who focused their worship around a grotesque, grim icon, a statue cast in a strange material of light-absorbing blackness, an indestructible statue, in fact, as it proved to be, entrapping within it a demonic form from physically manifesting, a fact that the cult sought to redeem. In their nefarious schemes, they unleashed a plague upon the predecessor city of Port Deepwaters that swept through the populace and brought it to the brink of destruction. It was only through the workings of Wizardry that the cult's plot was eventually brought to a halt, and the statue, while it wasn't possible to destroy it, became transmuted, dematerialized and locked into a file, with an added safety step in between, tying the resummoning of this statue to a magic item, a mythical pair of gloves created for just that purpose, in case a method was ever found to destroy the foul, light-absorbent black material. But as these things go, cities fall, eons pass, eras come and go, and what once was understood to be a tool of cataclysmic destruction became forgotten, hidden away behind a brick in the cellar of what used to be an important residence, but now is merely just another tunnel with a crumbling staircase. Little remains of that fallen city, very few records, but those that do reference the particular lattice work of skin discoloration and pustules that affect a sufferer of this cult-generated disease, which in time forms a webwork around the entire body, seeming almost like a patch of creeping vines with little pockets of blossoms in between. And it was for that reason that the sufferers in the fallen city referred to it as the Red Flower. Ragged breath coming out of a throat not used very much to running, feet shod in sandals not very much made for the task of running, hammering down on a pavement that is glistening with nighttime rain, the quick movements dirtying the hem of the robe of the runner, who turns out to be, as he steps into the rising moonlight, a wizard of a sort, his hood pulled up, running through a back way in the residential quarter of the merchant palaces. The wizard looks terrified, and his young, beardless face, wide-eyed staring at a reddish hue rising over the rooftops of this rich part of town, the consequence of an earlier, ear-splitting explosion that resonated unmistakably and drew the attention of everyone in this generally rather quiet neighborhood. And as the wizard runs and draws in more ragged breaths, he can't help but mutter to himself that this isn't how it was planned. What has happened? What did they do? And since the wizard is a coward, his eyes incessantly dart around the street ahead of him, ever nearer as he draws towards the merchant palace of House Marbas, now seemingly aflame, looking for help, for someone, something, a sign, an ally, anything. And yet so dark is the street, cast in shadows, that he almost trips over the figure lying there curled up before he realizes he is not, in fact, alone. Coming to an abrupt halt, Corhein, the wizard, looks down, and he sees a person gaunt of stature, their hawkish features combined with the emaciated look, giving them a rather severe appearance, an aspect reinforced by the paleness of their skin standing out even in this almost impenetrable darkness. Corhein is momentarily taken aback by the contrast of the strangely well-maintained flowing head of hair spilling out on the wet pavement around the head resting on the cobblestones, indicating this person might have a fair amount of money for self-care, and perhaps thus belongs to one of these merchant families. A fact seemingly reinforced by the flamboyant, fashionable, top-of-the-line clothing this figure is wearing, stained as it is now by the time spent resting in a place that isn't intended to be a resting place. And rushed and terrified as he is, Corhein's astute gaze and academic mind cannot help but notice the stains on this person's fingertips, marking them with the telltale signs of somebody who dabbles in the alchemical arts. Whatever misfortune befell this person, it must have been quite the fall from lofty heights, perhaps driven by ambition, crossing the wrong people, or perhaps simply squandering whatever fortune was made or inherited. And as the wizard halts for the second or two it takes him to rally himself from his near tumble over this prone body, the figure stirs, opens up an eye, and says, speaking with a rather clipped precision, "Considering you just put your boot in me, that leaves you with two choices. Either continue and finish the job, or be a dear, extend a hand and help me up." Hello friends, Anderson here. Welcome back to A Lonely Knave. What just happened? Well, let me quickly explain after my usual rallying cry of like, comment, subscribe, and all of that jazz. Thank you very much. When last we left off, Torga had a bit of a succession of unfortunate rolls, and I thought about it a little bit between recording sessions, thinking of how do I want to proceed, thinking of what do we actually already know, and that led me to putting together the pieces about Brimgor, the keeper of the red flower, because I feel like the red flower itself is a prompt. I was about to roll some prompts when I realized we have a prompt. What could this red flower be? So I started freewheeling, and I came up with a euphemism, a sort of a sardonic way to describe a certain disease, and that turns Brimgor in my mind to some kind of disease demon. And that also put me on the track of why, in fact, was it this convoluted of a setup where the gloves summon the statue, but the gloves have been dematerialized and hidden away in a kind of a vial that was itself hidden in an old cellar, and that brought me to layers of history and how things become forgotten over time, even if they are really dangerous things. So that's what got us to the point where I think we have now a pretty good idea of what Brimgor is and wants. Brimgor wants to manifest here, and Brimgor does this through the proliferation of his own special brand of disease. So effectively, if enough disease victims perish or infect each other and the epidemic fully rages, then Brimgore can manifest. And until then, he is immaterial and potentially locked in some kind of a struggle or takeover with Torga, or maybe he's already taken over Torga's body. And that led me to the next part. How do I resolve the Torga situation? Because our main narrative focus has now lost consciousness and also messed up a demonic summoning, both of which are not ideal. Add to that Corhein gave both Arcee and Torga the true sight of seeing everything just as it is right before that happened. I'm sure they had quite the spectacle that left nothing but scars on their minds, so I felt like we needed some new eyes, and that led me to Corhein, but I don't really want to play as Corhein. I don't think he's a very engaging knave, but he's a coward, and he's recruiting an engaging knave whom we just created. Now, let's give them a name. Go with the old reliable here that already gave us Torga, and we're getting a 59, which is Marius, which is male, which is also kind of the vibe I was already sort of subconsciously channeling, probably because Torga, our first protagonist, was female, so I figured let's mix it up a little bit. I'm glad that worked out. And Marius has been disowned and seems to have been a rich, perhaps recreational alchemist at some point, and is maybe now in the unfortunate situation of having to make money. So he's potentially for hire, or he's already been for hire for a while. And I feel like he probably got into his predicament there, prone on the floor and out of it, either by drowning his sorrows or by running afoul of some of the rioting that is still going on in Port Deepwater. Mustn't forget about the blockade. Mustn't forget that there is some real unrest in this place, which probably also spilled over into this merchant family quarter. Let's quickly hammer out Marius's stats. We rolled 3 die 6 and picked the lowest for the ability bonus. We get the option to flip one, so I put them on a temporary note, and we add 10 to get the actual ability score. That for the moment leaves us with Strength 4, Dex 3, Con 2, Int 4, Wisdom 3, and Charisma 5. Do I want to flip anything here? Maybe the Strength and the Dex. Yeah, I feel like this is more of a dexterous than a brawny person, even though seems pretty competent in everything. So Strength 3, Dex 4, Constitution 2, Intelligence 4, Wisdom 3, and Charisma 5. We do seem to have a knack for charismatic knaves here. Starting hit points 5, and we still need an alignment. 18, another agent of chaos. I guess it just makes him somewhat resistant to rigid structures of law and such, not necessarily a chaos worshipper, demon worshipper or something. Now, before we carry on, I think Marius needs to have his record scratch freeze frame. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation elaboration, to which we can lonely knave it up with an open question action subject how oracle roll. So die 20, die 8, and die 6. Let's go. 2, 5, 3. Persecute misfortune happily? This sounds pretty grim. I will happily persecute your misfortune. Is it his misfortune being, or is he the persecutor of others' misfortune and he does it happily? Well, he's not an agent of the law. He's an agent of chaos, but what if he's sort of like somebody who operates within the system of Port Deepwater but has no real convictions? He just relishes maybe the potential to be lawless on the side of the law. I'm going off on this because he's also an alchemist, which almost makes me think of like some kind of an investigator type with the whole seeming. He has this gaunt, severe looking, hawkish person of somewhat higher breed who's been disowned maybe at some distant point in the past by his family, but who is still ambitious. And perhaps, maybe he occupies some kind of a semi-official role, sort of like a interrogator / inquisitor type, who is part of like this shadowy inquest body that is working at the behest of the merchant families. And he ended up in his current predicament because he was visiting a client and got thumped by an angry mob that was roaming through the merchant palace quarter due to the current unrest. And since there are so many maneuverings going on here at the moment, does he work for Damakos? No, but he also doesn't work for Marbus, and his contract is finished. So he was on the way back, he got paid, he got robbed, because he's only like a semi-official government agent for special purposes. Since they handle all the enforcement here with mercenary types, I think that kind of fits. And now he's got this wizardly type standing over him who just fell over him almost and woke him up from his post-thump nap. And as he rights himself, and Corhein actually does help him to his feet, maybe there's like a silvery, spindly logo engraved in one of his tresses from his flamboyant uniform or clothing that Corhein recognizes as this is one of those inquisitorial types. And he's got this brief moment where he doesn't really know whether to laugh or cry, but settles on seeing it as sort of a stroke of luck, because there is actually something worth investigating. Are you well? Says Corhein, catching himself that maybe before accosting somebody with a new job, maybe ask for their well-being. And Marius, still reeling somewhat, touches the back of his head and comes away dry at least, and says, well, I'm sure it'll take hours to restore the wig, but that's beside the point. I guess the rest of me is fine. And since he's a shrewd operator, he favors Corhein with an eye-narrowing stare. But something about this nervous energy that has you bouncing on the balls of your feet constantly tells me that there is something that you want of me. And the fact that I smell fire and hear screaming makes me wonder whether these two things are directly related. Corhein gulps and nods. It's Marbus. They've come under attack. I'm sure they would pay well if you were to, let's say, accompany me, who is merely a humble servant of the family. Marbus and paying well goes about as well together as a virtuous whore, but I get your point. Now, where did I put my weapon? Where did, in fact, he put his weapon? I guess we still have to roll for that one. There are 6 weapon types, so we roll a die-6. We get a 2, which gives us options for a sword type kind of weapon with die 8 damage, taking 2 slots. I kind of feel inclined to downgrade this to like a rapier sort of thing, but since we did roll this for like a 2 weapon thing, maybe he's doing like a rapier mangoche kind of affair with a parrying dagger, so that's what he has. So in line with his general flamboyancy, he's got a bit of a flamboyant fighting style as well. No armor, I would say. He's reliant on his clothing. And next to his weapons that he picks off the ground that he kind of fell on, he also got a little bit of dungeoneering gear, which is a mirror and a hammer. I guess the mirror is kind of appropriate for somebody who is ostensibly a bit vain, perhaps. And so Corhein, racked with terror of what he set in motion and wanting to satisfy his curiosity as to what Torga and Arcee have wrought on House Marbus and whether it can fall back on him, and now in the company of a capable navy type, not like the boat kind, but the one with the K, never mind, a knave type person anyway, is a bit more relieved, and they start falling into step next to one another and moving through this back alley into the main thoroughfare and towards the fenced-in compound of House Marbus, which is, well, at least partly on fire. We knew there was a second insertion as well from House Damakos that tries to abduct this noble who is the butt of the bard's joke and has escalated this conflict. But we also know that something has gone awry, and that probably there is some demonic activity and perhaps some initial ground zero releasing of the red flower. I think we're at a stage here where we picture this compound, at least on the surface level, being surrounded now by a crowd already of whoever came out of the surrounding buildings, taverns and inns further down. The general rabble that is roaming around the quarter also being drawn to this loud noise, and perhaps being held back now by household guards of Marbus who don't know where to apply themselves, with chaos behind and an angry mob in front. And Marius favors Corhein with a sideward glance and a quizzical expression. And is this a good time for a social call, you think? And Corhein, who hadn't really thought past this point at all and was just waiting to see what was visible, which isn't much, there isn't an immediate clue as to what happened, is now thinking, okay, do we risk underground again? Or do we try and find a way up? So let's ask the Oracle, does Corhein think now is a good time to drag Marius down into the tunnels again? 11. Shake up. Oh god. This invalidates the question. I need some help here. Action subject how? 4 truce, 2 tension, 1 boldly. Truce brings to mind Damacos and Marbus. Tension brings to mind the current situation. Boldly brings to mind some kind of an bold intervention. So as Corhein and Marius are looking on the crowd and the crowd control that is starting to fail, of people pushing towards the palace, where now there is a glimmer of fire behind some of the downstairs windows and a pillar of smoke rising from the back. A, compared to the crowd, smaller yet still sizable detachment of black-clad figures bursts from the shadows and falls in alongside the household guards of Marbus, who are momentarily confused but won't say no to the help, even though they recognize them as a group of thugs in the employ of House Damacos, who are now pushing back and beating back the mob and locking down this front entrance together with the Marbus guards, making this completely invalid as a point of approach. Because as soon as the mob is beaten somewhat into submission, which doesn't take long now that these well-equipped thugs and household guards join forces, and there is a little brief murmur of conferring between the household guard gate captain and the leader of the Damacos thugs, to the effect of, okay, something funky has happened. We had nothing to do with this. This has gone all way too far. Now your palace is on fire. We don't risk this kind of escalation. Let's help us help you. So there is no other choice for Corhein and Marius than to find a different approach. I know of another way in. Follow me. And Corhein whirls around, robes dramatically flapping, and sandals off, with Marius just cocking an eyebrow and wandering behind him, rapier swishing somewhat at his side. And as he walks, he rights the cuffs of his flamboyant overcoat and makes sure that all the tresses are back in order, and disgustedly looks at all the stains on it and still messes with his elaborate wig. And Corhein leads Marius to another rather unobtrusive looking wall, a black slab of marble set into the underpass between 2 houses that are connected. And it looks like an old slab, easy to disregard until he starts gesturing and symbols appear and it retracts and allows them to step in and down back into the underground, towards where we last left Arcee and Torga off, so we can get eyes on what happened down there, following along with Corhein and Marius as they find that hole in the vault structure, that chaotic scene of riches strewn everywhere, blown apart, the distraction, detonation created by House Damakos. And I think, again, so many variables in this situation, we could do with another action subject, how oracle, instead of a yes-no oracle here, just as some setup, because when last we left here, there were guards on the way, Arcee was still up, going for the religious icon, Torga messed up the summoning, the statue no doubt appeared. Something's going on here, what is it? 9, 6, and 5. Release dangers jealously. The jealously throws me off a bit. Releasing dangers, I kind of have an idea. Jealously is certainly a quality of a demon, I would say. So if the demon jealously, lacking a corporeal form, has now perhaps found a way again to release his dangers, that would tell me that the red flower is on the loose. So we have a brief moment where Marius and Corhein take in this destroyed wall opening before 5 shambling silhouettes pour out of the hole, and they are still clad in the livery of the household servants and guards of House Marbus, but their skin is pulsating red with a latticework of plant-like looking infection, and their eyes are bloody, their mouths are hanging open, and there is a glimmer of madness in their expression, which looks no longer human. And Corhein has only got brief, fleeting milliseconds to stammer something as Marius is already tearing his rapier and his parrying dagger out, assuming a fighting stance. And we'll pick it up next time. Thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you then, and bye for now.